There's a mountain road in Japan, somewhere above the city lights, where the air still smells like burnt rubber and gasoline. And if you had stood there 30 years ago, late at night, you would have heard it before you ever saw it. A four-cylinder engine, screaming into the dark, tires losing their grip, on purpose. The car making that sound wasn't a Ferrari. It wasn't a Lamborghini, or a Porsche, or anything your mind reaches for when it hears the word legend. It was a Nissan. A cheap, ordinary, mass-produced Nissan that a young mechanic could actually afford. And somehow, against every expectation, this humble little coupe became the most worshipped car in an entire global culture. Not the most expensive, not the fastest, the most loved. This is the story of how the cheapest way into a dream became the king of it. To understand why the Silvia matters, you first have to understand how unremarkable it was supposed to be. Nissan didn't build it to be a legend. They built it to sell. An affordable, good-looking, everyday sports coupe for ordinary people in Japan. Nothing exotic, nothing extreme. A car you could take to work on Monday and to the coast on Sunday. But sometimes the most ordinary things carry a secret, and the Silvia's secret was in the way it was built. The engine sat in the front, and it sent its power to the rear wheels. Front engine, rear wheel drive. A simple, almost old-fashioned layout, but it gave the car something you cannot fake and cannot buy: balance. The weight sat evenly across the car. The body was light, and the whole thing felt alive in your hands in a way that far more expensive cars simply didn't. And in its best versions, under that hood sat an engine that would become a legend in its own right. A turbocharged four-cylinder called the SR20DET. Small, tough, and endlessly willing to be pushed further. You could take this engine, and with time, money, and a little bit of obsession, turn it into something ferocious. On paper, it was a nice, affordable coupe. In the right hands, on the right road, in the right night, it was about to become something nobody at Nissan ever imagined. High in the mountains of Japan, there are roads called Touge, narrow, twisting, carved into the sides of mountains, folding back on themselves in the dark. And in the 1980s and 90s, when the cities finally went to sleep, these roads woke up. Young drivers came here after midnight to test themselves against the corners, against each other, against their own fear. And somewhere up there, in the headlights and the cold air, something new was being born. Not driving through a corner as fast as possible, but sliding through it, sideways, on purpose, holding a car right at the edge of losing control completely, and never quite letting it go. They called it drifting, and it was less like a sport and more like a dance with a machine that was always trying to get away from you. One man turned that dance into an art, a driver named Touge, a man who would become known around the world as the Drift King. He didn't invent the physics of a slide, but he was the one who made it beautiful, who took something wild and dangerous and showed the world it could be pure poetry, on four wheels. And to perform that dance, you needed a very particular kind of partner. A car that was light, rear-wheel drive, so the back end could break loose on command, balanced, so you could feel every inch of the slide through your hands. And this is the part that mattered more than anything. Cheap enough that a normal kid could afford to crash one while learning. There was one car that answered every single one of those needs, and you already know which one. The Silvia wasn't the only car people drifted, but it may have been the perfect one, because everything that made it an ordinary, affordable coupe turned out to be exactly what a drifter needed: a light body, rear-wheel drive, near-perfect balance, an engine you could upgrade almost forever, and a price low enough that when you spun it into a barrier, and you would, it wasn't the end of your world. You swept up the pieces, you fixed it, and you went again. And that changed everything. Because drifting wasn't born in boardrooms or racing teams with big budgets. It was born from young people with far more passion than money. Mechanics, students, dreamers with grease under their fingernails. Ferraris and exotics were something you watched from behind a fence. The Silvia was something you could actually do. And over the years, it grew into a family. The S13 came first, clean, smooth, with a timeless shape that people still fall in love with today. Then the S14, wider, lower, more muscular, planted to the road. And finally, the S15, the last one, and to many, the greatest, sharper, angrier, the most refined machine the Silvia ever became. Each generation earned its own following, each one its own devotion, and drifting itself kept growing. From illegal runs on dark mountain roads to a real sport, with arenas, with crowds, with world champions and television cameras, and riding at the very front of that wave, the entire way, was that humble little Nissan that was never meant to be special at all. Then it crossed the ocean. As drifting spread from Japan to America to Europe to the whole world, the Silvia went with it. And here is where the story takes a strange, almost cruel turn. Because in America, the country that would fall hardest of all for drifting, you couldn't really buy the real Silvia. Oh, Nissan sold them a version. They called it the 240SX. It looked almost right. It had the same beautiful body, the same balance, but under the hood, where the legendary turbo engine should have been, Nissan put something else entirely. A slower, heavier, naturally aspirated engine, borrowed, of all things, from their pickup trucks. Americans got the shape of the dream, but not its heart. And the crown jewel, the S15, the final, greatest Silvia, was never sold there at all, locked out by strict import laws that forced enthusiasts to wait 25 long years just for the chance to legally own one. So for a whole generation of drivers, outside Japan, the true Silvia became something more powerful than any car. It became a forbidden dream, something you saw in video games, in anime, in grainy import magazines, in videos from the other side of the world. A whole generation fell in love with a car most of them had never even seen in person. And that longing only made the legend burn brighter. And that longing had a price. The cheap little coupe that broke kids once bought to learn on became one of the most sought-after cars in the world. Today, a clean original Silvia, especially an S15, can sell for many times what it costs new, sometimes far more. Enthusiasts even have a name for it: the drift tax. The strange, bittersweet reality that the very cars once loved because they were affordable have become so worshipped that the next generation of broke, dreaming kids can barely afford them anymore. The car that opened the door, slowly, quietly, became a car behind glass. Here's what I think the Silvia really teaches us. The cars we end up loving the most are almost never the ones that were supposed to be loved. Nobody planned any of this. Nissan built a sensible coupe for commuters, and a generation of young people with empty wallets and full hearts took it up into the mountains and turned it into a legend. The Silvia became great, not because of what it was, but because of what people did with it. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of all. It was never the most expensive, never the fastest, never the most advanced. It was the most reachable. And sometimes, that is exactly what turns a simple machine into a myth. The dream was never locked behind a fortune. It was parked on a quiet side street, under a streetlight, waiting for someone, with just enough courage to take it up the mountain. So tell me, have you ever driven one? Ever wanted one? Was there a car that was your forbidden dream? The one you fell in love with, long before you ever sat inside it? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. Because that's what this channel is really about. Not just the machines, but the people who love them and the stories that turned ordinary metal into legend. If that's something you want more of, stick around. We're just getting started.